Dr. Gozzoli is an assistant professor at Migdol University International College in Thailand. He got his PhD in ancient history and archaeology from the University of Birmingham in the United Kingdom, and usually researches late period Egypt, roughly between the end of the New Kingdom and the early Ptolemaic period, as well as cultural heritage management and sustainable tourism. He's the author of a couple of books and articles going back to the late 1990s, and is always willing to extend his scholarly research interests and in academic collaborations. He's going to talk to us today on the topic of Egyptian hieroglyphs as God's language in the kingdom of Kush. Was Pianki hieroglyphic literate? So Dr. Gozzoli, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear my voice loud
Perfectly.
and clear. And okay, first of all, good evening from Thailand, where actually I'm based. Also, I want to, okay, doesn't move. Yes. I'm very happy to say that I've been here for this conference. I actually was in two other firsts almost 20 years ago, the current research in Egyptology in 2000, as well as in the first international conference of young Egyptology. So it means that some years are passed from my own graduation times and I'm getting old. So anyway, the topic of today is simply how Egyptian hieroglyphs pass from Egypt into Kush, and when Kush became one of the world leader in the 8th and 7th century BC. So this is Kush, is actually the territory of Sudan. And you can see in red what was actually the hinterland of Kush itself. So you have here Kerma, Kawa, you have here the area of Jebel Barka, which is actually the major territory, the more or less where the Kush as empire came out. So this is what we call as Kushite Dynasty. Actually, the Kushite Dynasty by Manetho is actually labeled as 25th dynasty, but in this case, what I list the Kushite kings here were a bit longer than that. We are here from Al-Arab to Tantamani or Tenutamun. The actual focus anyway of today is actually Pianki, which actually I give here in hieroglyphs. Pianki itself was more or less the king ruler, first of all, conquering Egypt, and most of all, opening and starting very intensely an Egyptianization of Kushite culture. This was actually, of course, been there before at the time of the New Kingdom Empire. But after that, of course, when the New Kingdom Empire fell down in more or less in 1070, there was most of a disappearance of cultural link south of Egypt. So, as I said, this one is part two. There are some antecedents of this research. My research was actually started a few years ago when in other kind of test, I discovered what is actually called in Egyptology, the so-called hierarchy of knowledge. So text, Kushite text written in hieroglyphs, where there is the distinction between the layman, the subjects, who don't know what the words of God are, and in this case by God means Amun, and the king himself. This is actually the parts I'm dealing with, and the king himself, which actually appears as epiphany of Amun's will. So starting from these antecedents, I wanted to develop more. I wanted to know if the hierarchy of knowledge actually also mean the capacity of reading hieroglyphs, at least by the royal court. In fact, I said in a book chapter published last year, whatever the political reason, as the Kushite royal text allied the higher knowledge the Kushite king had, such knowledge certainly contrasts over the fact Egyptian hieroglyphic literacies within Kush during the 25th dynasty was mostly limited to the temple and royal palace. An even more restricted base of literacy during peace times is allowed, pending the fact that more citations from Egyptian literature are present in his text than in any of the later texts, possibly hinting to the need of more direct Egyptian Theban influence or copy. So this was actually my conclusion last year. As far as we know in Egypt, royal literacy was actually known. The Nefertiti prophecy said about that. So they said that Snefru, king of the fourth dynasty, wrote down what Nefertiti was dictating. You see here on the right-hand side, Tutankhamun scribal tools. So we know that at least as education of royal prince, Egyptian princes and of course pharaoh, they were able to read and write. This was actually my question point. Was Bianchi hieroglyphic literate? So the next step is actually seeing how hieroglyphics, Egyptian hieroglyphs in Kush appeared between the fall of the New Kingdom until the period of Bianchi. And at the moment, from the archaeological point of view, culture in the region of Jebel Barka and archaeological discovery, they're actually limited. This is actually a tomb, more or less, being dated the 19th dynasty and being in use for actually 4 centuries. So you have here scarabs, Egyptian or Egyptianizing. You can see here Menkaperra written on it. So they are clearly Egyptian inspirations or Egyptian artifacts. You have here the Osiris barge, meaning the voyage of Osiris in the afterworld during the nighttime. But there are also elements properly belonging to a Kushite area, to Kushite culture, like here cattle's depiction, which are not appearing in Egypt. So this is one of the points. So the archaeology seems like pointed out a mix of Egyptian and local culture after the fall of the New Kingdom. This is the first test we know about. This test is called Katimalo inscription, is inscribed on the Semna temple, and this temple was actually built by Hatshepsut and Thutmose III. The inscription is, mostly the iconography is already peculiar, where you have a Kushite queen followed by a female figure and fronting the Egyptian goddess Isis. It's very, very peculiar of the Kushite tradition having the female role in such preeminence. If for the one known in Egypt, Hatshepsut was the exceptional case within ancient Egyptian civilization, but was an aberration. I'm sorry to say, but in any case, it was not common in ancient Egypt. For Kush, the role of the women is more preeminent. So having said that, what is also peculiar is actually the text itself. I don't want to read it all, but please note the part written in blue. In this case, a Kushite queen writing in a language possibly not their own. Katimala and the scribe compose an innovative inscription, making new use of older literary forms. And this statement is more in tune when we see the next parallel. Colombert in 2003 analyzed the Kadimalo test and discovered many similarities with a Middle Kingdom border stela text of Sesostri III at Semna in the same place. This stela now is actually at the Berlin Museum. So if you see, this is the Katimalo parallel as well as the Sesostri one. there are many similarities. Okay, in this case, Catimalo said, bad is the pharaoh who is stripped of his strength, while the other side said, I do not recognize, my son, anyone who does not keep the border. So there are expressions similar coming from both tests, but they mean the situation is actually reversed. So what does it mean in our case? It means that Catimalo, or whoever describes writing for her, they were able to imitate text or inscription from around the place where they were, at the same time creating innovation, creating new situations. And this is important for this text, usually dated to the 21st or 22nd dynasty, but of course the dating is actually sometimes controversial, pointed out with the next text. With this text is actually a fragmentary still, now kept at the Khartoum, Sudan National Museum, is actually dated before Pianchi. And as you can see here, there is the god Amun of Napata, Jebel Barka, followed by, in this case, Mut and Khans. And here in front, there is an erased figure. This erased figure at the beginning was supposed to be Pianchi. There is still the name. But in any case, recent scholarship by Lockwasser demonstrated that this figure is actually a later addition. Whatever is the addition doesn't matter. What matters for us, they're actually the contents. I highlight here in different color the part we are actually interested about. First of all, Amun says, I told you since the belly of your mother that you are going to be ruler of Egypt. I know since the semen, as you were in the egg, that you are going to rule what I made. So here there is the declaration of the god Amun saying that the king was more or less announced since his birth that he was to be. But also want to highlight what are the royal words themselves. In blue, you have Amun of Napata gave me to be ruler of every foreign land. The next part is Amun in Thebes appointed to me ruler in Egypt. So you have here two hypostases. One Amun of Napata saying you're going to rule all the foreign lands, and the law Amun of Egypt saying that you are going to be ruler of Egypt. Why is it important? Because here these apostles return to the documents we are under study, which is actually this one. This is the so-called Pianchi triumphal stela, which is actually kept at the Cairo Museum. This is very peculiar because it's written on 4 sides. No other documents, no other inscription in Egypt is written on 4 sides unless it's a column. And also is one of the longest text, 159 lines. And here you have what is peculiar of the text itself and the old general. You have here a unique representation of the historical situation on the 24th dynasty. You have here Pianchi, now erased. You have Amun, you have Mut. You have here chief of Ma, the Libyan rulers in Egypt, as well as the king of Egypt. There are actually 3. As well as you have Nimlot shaking the cistern, leading the hearts, and his wife in the first place. These represent the triad, when Pianchi is actually recognized as the son of God, say like that. He repeats also in other scenes in Kush, and like here for Aspelta, coronation stela, where Nazalza, the mother of Aspelta, shake the cistern in front of the divine triad again. But again, is different from the normal Amenhotep III in Luxor, where you have the god Amun giving the life to the mother Amenhotep III, Mutemuya. So again, Kushites innovate over Egyptian repertoire. Pianki, as for all of you know about it, is rich of literary citations. So you have here triumphal stela and parallel texts from the ancient Egyptian literature. I want to put apart, we don't have the time to go one by one, but I want to show you that the citation, they're quite short. And this is where I say that they may be due to, of course, education or orality. And we will see later why this concept is important. As I said, I'm a bit old. So 20 years ago, I studied the fact that Pianki imitates the stele of Tutmosis III at Jebel Barka. I gave here some of the parallels. Tutmosis III on the right-hand side, Pianki on the left, on the right side. And again, there are more and more. In this case, anyway, these imitations, they are with variation, both for the position in the text, as well as they're not word by word copy. So again, Pianki imitates Tutmosis III with variations and adaptations. Most of what the stela of Pianki transmits is also carved, in the reliefs in the Temple of Amun at Jebel Barka after Spalinger. So in this case, these areas, they have decoration that depicts many scenes of the triumphal stela narratives. So you see here the same chief of mine, the same position. You see the horses like you see before. You see here the fighting in a battle. So anyway, they are following Egyptian conventions. Again, Pianki is extending Egyptian culture within his own country. The Pianki tomb itself, we don't know much about it. We assume that based on Reisner, there was a pyramid at the top, and there was other funerary objects that they follow Egyptian culture. But anyway, his wife got, again, Tabiri, a funerary stela. So again, never happened before, and more and more will happen later. So again, Pianki is a beginning of this kind of Egyptianization within Kush. So having said so, the main question between Egyptologists is, what are the origins of this influence? One idea is there has been a temple library. So the temple library, with local production of the text. The second opinion is the triumphal stela was created as template in Thebes due to the linguistic point of view. Before answering this question, whatever is the opinion I have, there is also another issue. What is the archaeological evidence of libraries at Jebel Barka? You see here, there are many different buildings, palaces, we said already temples, and other palaces. But at the moment, there is no evidence of libraries at Jebel Barka. So it means that, or at least we can think that, okay, it's more possible that a template coming from Thebes was actually then produced within Kushite workshops. I also point out as devil's advocate the fact that libraries under different names in ancient Egypt itself were very rare. So again, the presence of library in Jebel Barka, we can see it in many different ways. But here, a text from the Stela Kawar 4 of Taarko may be illuminating. Again, points out that Egyptian workmen came to build and decorate the temple of Gemathen, of Amun at Kaaba Gemathen. And here, from the same temple, the reliefs, they show this influence of Egyptian workmen. At the same time, I put here in blue, this scene here, and all the models are from the Old Kingdom. But this scene, example, the one we have, does not have an exact parallel within Old Kingdom. There are, whatever the Kushite artist did is recreating this Old Kingdom relief with adjustments. In this case, for the one they want to know, this is from the temple of Sahura, and this one is from the temple of Pepi. So, and we are going to the conclusion. Sorry, I'm a bit long. First of all, I believe that for Kush and literacy and the Egyptian text, at the beginning, orality, as well as the existence of template, were one of the major points. These templates were actually reworked within Kushite workshops. And second, actually third point, imitation and differentiation from monuments in proximity was one of the criteria for which Kushite workmen of Egyptian workmen in Kush, anyway, they work over the Kushite royal test. And many of these descriptions I didn't talk about, but they appear within the Temple of Amun or other temples. So in this case, the Kushite temple become what is called by Asman cultural repositories. They contain the sort of the knowledge of the world. So the final question is, was Pianchi hieroglyphic literature? Sorry. My guesswork is, I believe that if you create a new text, you try to imitate Tutmosis III, you elaborate from the tradition, you should be able to read. So in this case, I can say a sort of guesswork, yes, Pianchi was able to read the Egyptian hieroglyphs. But there is also another point. Following this sentence of Asman, Egyptian hieroglyphs in the land of Kush became, as the word said, hieroglyphs. They become the language of God, and Pianchi, or anyway, the Kushite king, was the actual reader and priest. For the one interested, here's the actual bibliography. I mean, at least for the one I work for. And I thank you very much for your attention to listen about Kush and literacy. Thank you.
Dr. Gozzoli, that was absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much. We have a couple of questions that we're going to try and get to very, very quickly before we move on to the next and final presentation in this session. Someone was asking, do we know when the Kushite people originated?
Okay, so the story of Kerma, the kingdom of Kerma, was actually contemporary with the Egyptian Middle Kingdom and second intermediate period. So we have to identify one thing: what is Kush as a political entity, and what is Nubia, which is actually the geographical entity itself. So I would say that Bruce Williams at the University of Chicago said that ancient Egypt and ancient Sudan were actually contemporary. So again, if you date the Egyptian civilization to, say, 3,500 before Christ, more or less, Kush as a territorial entity was existing since then. But again, it's an opinion. Also, please bear in mind that we talk about a political entity called Kush, but we don't know much about the ethnicity of this of the population of Kush itself. So again, movement is another issue.
Lovely, thank you very much. And the second and final question, are there reasons given in the texts you've studied for the Egyptianization of Kush?
Nope. It's like, I can say that we know more and more, okay, someone's simply connected to the fact that Kush, okay, conquered Egypt, so the fact that they conquered Egypt also had an influx of workmen, etc. But there is more than that. I can see, I can say, it's like when we, I'm sorry, I'm Italo-American, but I lived in Italy most of my life, okay? So it's like they are more Pope than a Pope, okay? So they are more, so they are more keen about having this kind of Egyptian culture in itself than the actual Egyptian. So this is, I can say that, so is a question of acculturation, and I believe that they felt Egyptian culture as their own. So it's an appropriation, not for, in this case, enlargement, say like that.
Well, lovely. Thank you so much for taking the time to present your research and for answering our questions.
No problem, you're welcome.
Before we move on to our third and final presenter of this session, just a couple of housekeeping things that I really should have mentioned before we got started. We are taking donations. SASA is a non-profit, and as I mentioned earlier, Digital Hammurabi is also associated with a non-profit. So all donations received will be split between those two entities and will go to helping to spread the joy of ancient studies as far as we can. You can donate, please, through the SASA website, that is saveancient.com. There is a saveancientstudies.org. There is a donation button on the conference page. Please do not donate directly through YouTube. Unfortunately, YouTube appropriates a significant amount of any donations made through their platform. So if you would like to donate, then please do go to the conference page instead.